Act 1. Eternal Ghost. In the eyes of Riku Dragentail, and we are in Fawn Coast, in the world of Fawn. It is late morning on November 17th, 2017. Scene 1. Sea Legs. Sitting at the edge of the beach, I tasted salt on my tongue, carried by a gentle, wafting breeze that cooled my skin. The air felt somehow cool and warm at the same time. I let the waves lap across my bare feet, soaking in the purities of uncorrupted water while I stared out at the open ocean. Of all the worlds I'd been to, I'd never seen such a thing. Blue waters stretched out to touch the sky, extending fingers of clairvoyance to the corners of the world. It was a stark contrast to my home world, the land of the living, where derelict waterways bore the scars of neglect and toxins. It made the concept of swimming alien to me and my friends, a luxury too dangerous to consider. Fawn, Sierra called this. Fawn was the world we now found ourselves in, the same day after our flight from Orden. This world was just one of an insurmountable number of other worlds in the spirit realm, an unknown variable that made me feel small and insignificant to even wonder. Here in Fawn, and seemingly in many other worlds, nature thrived, untouched by the devastation that marred my own. It was easy to think enviously about it, yet my role as a defender anchored me to that harsh reality. As long as I lived, I could never fully enjoy such a beautiful place. One foot would always be in the land of the living. This role I'd encountered kept me from fully escaping its squalor. At least, I could partially escape, something most of my world could never do until death. Not every world was enviable, of course. I could all too easily remember the ruin of Vixura, a craggy mass that made my world look wholesome. And, of course, there was Orden, a world of storms, home of the Dark Empire. After my failure and our necessary departure from the very place I needed to be, I tried to force the thoughts from my mind. Thinking of my failure wouldn't help now. For everyone's sakes, I just needed to get stronger. And so I was here, Fawn, the most beautiful world I'd ever seen. What are you staring at, dumbass? Sierra's sharp voice cut through my thoughts like a hot knife. Startled, I tried to stand up and slipped on some sort of shell beneath me. I flailed wildly in the air, trying to save myself, and a pair of warm hands caught me around the waist, easily steadying me. Her touch was firm yet gentle, and I caught a faint sniff of airy, floral notes from her proximity. Honestly, can you get any dumber? Her words bit at me, as usual. Sierra spun me around to face her. In a world of summery beauty, she was a tempest. Her shoulder-length, straight scarlet hair and matching eyes gleamed with the sun's reflection, trying to stop a smirk that wriggled at the corner of her lips. Her sleeveless white shirt, with a rare low neckline, revealed her black bra and a bit of her toned midriff. Her black cargo pants were rolled up to just below her knees, which looked pale in the gently lapping waves. I fought a blush that rose like a confused, betraying rhapsody all over my face. We'd been through a lot together, and I wasn't sure where we stood now. One moment we were kissing in the shadows of the castle, but seemingly the very next something ate at her in ways I couldn't hope to patch up, and I became the punching bag for it. I was trying to look out over the water, I retorted, until you came crashing in. Oh, shut up, she muttered, and let me go. Without her grip, I flailed and splashed in the water, struggling to right myself. I was not used to walking in this. When I turned to her, about to snap, she was staring out over the waves into the vast sea. The ocean, huh? Guess you've never seen something like this before. Her sudden shift took me aback. I managed to find my footing. No, not at all. Without her and Will, escape from Orden would have been a fantasy. Sometimes she was so sharp, I forgot to wonder how she was doing. Orden was hard for her too. She liked to brush off her problems and move past it even if the wounds didn't heal. I could relate to that. Time wouldn't stop for either of us. Sierra grunted, shoving her hands in her pockets. It's overrated, really. Just big, salty lakes that stretch out further than you can see. Murky and dirty. Who knows what's in them, especially in a new world like this. She didn't stop looking out over the water, though. With only a moment more of delay, and no otherwise warning, she reached for her sword. I reacted in alarm, and she gave me a sidelong grin that sparked like some of her inner fire gushed out. Come on, kid, you're made of tougher stuff than before, aren't you? Let's spar, you and me. See if you can't defend yourself yet. I didn't move. Seriously? With all that's going on, you want to spar? I should have known. You want to get stronger, doesn't that come with the territory? The way she talked, it was the most obvious conclusion in the world. She drew Sinistra, and the way the sunlight caught the fire blade was magnificent. Sinistra was longer than any sword I'd ever seen, and its face was as deep red as flavored punch or strawberries with 10 times the violence. Her grin lapsed as she scowled into the sun. After all, not like you can beat Lars if you can't beat me. The bitterness ate through her voice. Lars defeated all of us, and Cira was no exception. Even the mighty Sinistra couldn't escape being batted aside by Lars in the end. Will lost his mighty lance in the combat, something left from his father, Jason. I never asked him what that did to him. In the aftermath of that battle, it felt like covering a grave with a band-aid and expecting them to be okay. Will left something behind in that place. Will lost his lance, a legacy from his father before he became whatever Jason was. For Cira, her unwavering facade took a beating, revealing cracks in the armor she always wore so proudly. And me? I lost the prisoner I meant to escape with, Chris Olestein, the only link I had to my missing sister. Was she locked somewhere in that castle too, like I thought I saw? I felt Cira's eyes on me for a long moment as I deliberated. When I glanced up, she leveled that giant sword against me. The blade writhed like fire itself as the sunlight caught it. Well, come on, kid, let's go. Cira wasn't waiting for my response, and she slashed at me. It was an easy swing in case I was dumb enough not to dodge. I stumbled back, barefoot, and my fingers deftly freed out my knife from its holster. It was a horribly meager defense against such a mighty sword, especially when wielded by Cira, but it was all I'd carried out into the water. It was a lot scarier to block an attack from Cira than it was to dodge. Sparks rained across the sand from the clash of steel, reflecting brilliantly in her eyes. Cira's brows rose in pleasant surprise, then she put a little more strength behind her blade. Now I hopped away, splashing water all around as I danced away from Cira's attack. Her blade dragged to the crest of a wave, spraying steam and water in an arc. I met the assault at the tip of her blade and lashed, trying to weaken her grip enough to close in. She repented quickly and swung again in full, a battle-hungry grin already alight across her lips. This time I drew on the strange little marks on my wrists. They looked like 3 intersecting waves with a narrow streak of lightning connecting them. After they first appeared on me back in Vortigern, I'd come to call them my weightless marks. At my behest, they began to glint a faint blue as I hopped into the air with gusto, creating only a light splash and easily clearing the height of Cira's slash, where I chose to land atop her blade in motion. I quickly rescinded, however, when I found her blade hot beneath my feet. I let out a yelp as I stumbled back into the water, eager to get my burnt feet back in the cool water. Cira laughed outright at me. Cool trick, but you're mine now. She dashed at me with a fluid grace, her wet clothes clinging to her body and emphasizing her every curve. I danced around the swing of her sword and hopped within her inner circle. I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with a tinge of fear. What if one of her playful blows landed? The thought vanished as quickly as it came, and I saw her eyes alight with surprise. This close, I could see the droplets of water clinging to her long dark lashes, and her drenched clothes clung to her in an appealing way. I breathed in an airy floral aroma from her with a subtle undertone of amber. Up close and off her guard, there was something unworldly pretty about Cira. I thought this as I cupped her cheek in my hand and kissed her. She chuckled and smiled into my lips. Then and only then did her sword hand relax, and she kissed me back, one hand around my waist. It was a daring move. With Cira, though, I sometimes had to be so. Like most else about Cira, her lips always seemed scathing until I pressed against them. Then they were soft and fit against mine in earnest, filling a bit of that emptiness that swallowed me since my failure in Orden. We'd gotten deeper into the water, now almost to my chest, while still shallow to Cira. Still, she lowered herself in the water until we felt the same height. I felt a rush of attraction for her, clutching her equally for that and the need for balance and warmth in the ocean. Her white shirt was completely see-through at this point, and my hand unconsciously found its way to her skin. For being so fit, I always found her skin to feel alluringly soft and warm under mine. Even in the slightly chilly water, she radiated warmth in a way that drew me closer. "You gonna pull this against Lars, too?" she asked once our lips separated, her nose touching mine. It was a rare, cute expression from her. She seldom let them last longer than a moment, and usually she'd lash out if I said anything. Instead, I frowned up at her. I think it worked better on Vincent. She shoved me away, grimacing. "Crater smite me, don't even joke about that." Shit, why couldn't I resist being sarcastic to her? A second later, she was lunging at me again with her sword aloft. If I was sparring with anyone but Cira Jessera, I might not have predicted such a low blow. As luck found it, I did, and danced away from the fangs of her mighty weapon into shallower water, waves slapping against my legs. I briefly noticed how Cira moved in the waves. Ignoring her vivacious curve, she seemed to use the resistance of the waves to her advantage. She struck with the waves in the same rhythm as the rise and fall of her chest. When she rose her sword in the air again, I'd righted myself and tried to dive into her inner guard again, but found the flat of her blade blocking me with startling speed. I skirted around it just in time to dodge a broken nose and lunge back into the waves, away from Sierra. My leg struck something, cutting me short, and a wave crashed over my head. I went completely under. Panic washed over me like the cresting wave. I didn't know how to swim at all, not that I was out far. Open-eyed, I stared out into the dark waters of Fawn ahead, seaweed churning like sea monsters below the waves. Since this wasn't my world, could that be an actual thing? Did sea monsters exist in Fawn? Was Sierra right to be suspicious? Far ahead, nearly out of sight in the bluish darkness, something began to move. Oxygen whooshed back into my lungs abruptly, too fast. My head popped out in the lapse of a wave. I glimpsed something on the horizon, across the water. I almost went back under, but a powerful arm steadied me. Sierra. She looked like she had gone under, too, her hair clinging to her face and neck, but she didn't look half as disoriented as I was. If I wanted to drink a gallon of seawater today, I have told you, she muttered scathingly. Just what are you staring at? It took me a moment to focus, coughing and wiping streaming water from my face and eyes. Salt water didn't taste very good, I'd learned. Then I returned my gaze out to the water. The longer I looked, the clearer I could see it. It was no sea monster. The crown of an enormous ship pointed near us. A ship. Yeah, a big one, huge sails. Black flags, probably headed for... Tracing a path with my eyes, I saw what looked like a pier on the shore nearby, maybe a mile south from us. It was little more than a long bridge where smaller boats may dock. If it sent out of rowboats to reach it, I imagined that it could reach us near later today. Sierra listened as I explained, brow raised. Huh, you can see all that? Good eyes, kid. She started for shore. I watched her for a moment, half submerged in the water. Her scarlet hair looked almost black when it was wet. Her drenched clothes clung to her skin, emphasizing every curve to her body. Despite her usually guarded demeanor, there was an undeniable allure to her, especially now with the sun highlighting her athletic build, and the way her cargo pants clung to her thighs and rear. I particularly liked watching her rear as she stomped through the water. The next thing I knew, she was looking back at me over her shoulder with a smirk, brows furrowed. Well, lover boy, let's go find out what they're up to. I hesitated. Really? What if they're hostile? That black flag. Sierra snorted derisively, shamelessly tugging her drenched white shirt over her head. Her toned, sun-kissed skin looked at home on the glinting sands against the teal blue sky. That's the point, kid. We're supposed to be getting stronger, aren't we? We sure as hell aren't gonna do that if we try to make some new friends. Unless you'd rather beat up your friends to get better. I wrinkled my nose at her, but she didn't notice. I doggedly followed her, stumbling as she fished out one of her usual black shirts from her bag. She didn't bother to dry herself off in any way. I could only watch with a smirk as she struggled with pulling the new shirt over her head. I ended up using my marks to get out of the water with more ease. Once I grabbed my things, we trudged our way down the beach, leaving muddy prints in the sand and dripping like we took part of the ocean with us. There it was again, I thought. The need to get stronger. Just how are we supposed to do that? Beat the tar out of people until we got better at doing it? I couldn't erase that face from my mind. During our last night in Orden, the eerie violet eyes of Vincent Ordenstrom were drowned out only by those of his son, Lars Ordenstrom, an entity who might be even more menacing than his father. Sir and Will fought the Emperor at my side on that last night and could attest to his sheer skill. He toyed with us until I landed a lucky hit, and I made it all too clear how far beyond our league he was. But even with the fierce Sira and stalwart Will, it was only thanks to the interference of Loki's son, Fenrir, along with the Timeless One and his team, that we managed to escape. Even then, of course, we forgot the only thing that truly mattered. In the chaos of our escape, we left without the person I was supposed to save, Chris Holstein, the last possible connection to my sister. Given all the strange things I'd learned since coming to the spirit realm, I hoped Chris might help me sort that out too. Trudging down the beach with Sierra, I thought about what shook me the most about my stay in Orden. Truth be told, it stuck in my mind even more tenaciously than Lars's unsettling serpentine glare. Just before entering the ballroom, I was almost certain I'd seen her. Roxanne, my sister. Her blonde hair tied up in a fine ponytail, wearing a white, regal dress. I was certain she fled the scene with a blonde man, possibly came a golden heart, but the scene didn't make sense. It was seconds before Lars Ordenstrom himself bore down upon me, and I wondered if the entire scenario might have just been wishful thinking. The relationship between Kimo and I was confusing at best, but wouldn't he tell me if he hid my sister in Orden somewhere? If she was there too, couldn't she reach out to me? Couldn't she too just find a method of travel and escape? I knew Kimo could, all too well. Regardless, I'd explained my theory to Will just before we left the Empire for good. If it was true, maybe Will could protect her for me until I returned. Until then, I wouldn't accomplish any more just by stressing about it. Already mostly dry within the hour, Sierra and I rushed along the beach in nervous silence. The large ship on the ocean slowly advanced, growing larger and larger as it drew closer. We passed through a brief section of jungle that wrapped around the shore. Sierra made quick work of some thick vines with her mighty blade, Sinistra, and we ducked around everything else. Luckily, we didn't come across any threats within the small expanse as I'd half-worried. Probably an hour went by until we reached the pier. It was little more than a rickety bridge, one which swayed in the current of the water where it stretched into the waves. In worse weather, the waves likely plowed down on it with a great deal of force. I wasn't eager to step out over the water, especially after our last encounter with a stormy moat in Orden. Sierra gestured to the boat, now pointing out a smaller dinghy making its way towards the pier. The great ship had stopped altogether. It must have dropped anchor. Now we only had to wait. Apparently bored of sparring with me, Sierra showed me how to use a smooth stone she carried to ensure the edge of my knife was up to snuff. We didn't bother with the smooth black face of Ragnarocker, the namesake blade that the Timeless One said belonged to me. That blade never seemed to dull, especially since I couldn't properly put it to use. I checked over my things safely on the shore, far away from that rickety pier where Sierra watched the ocean like she might dive in and bring the fight to those presumed pirates. Counting my arrows and ensuring my bag straps were tied tight, I smoothed the handle of my staff. I fiddled with the strings of my bow, but I was beyond understanding how to tweak it. Sierra didn't have any input either. I wished I'd gotten more archery lessons from Will. Mentally, I ran over the visuals I required to use my magic. How Kaya Ocean taught me only required me to imagine being in the elements, or things I associated with them. For water, her specialty, I can envision powerful creeks and streams, or maybe the grand ocean before me. The same applied for all the other elements I tried my hand at, and they turned out better with my visualization. It always worked better when I'd seen what I pictured too. Even then, I could only manage so much magic. The grander my visuals, the more energy it would drain from me until I could properly rest up. I studied the rowboat as it approached. One man stood in the boat, arms crossed, wearing a black coat and a wide-rimmed hat, but I couldn't spot much else of notes about him. I could tell he knew we were here, gesturing and talking animatedly with his crew, at least 10 of them who did all the work of rowing the boat. When they drew closer, I finally braved the pier with Sierra to meet the incoming group. The rickety bridge creaked and shuddered with every step I took, so I practically tiptoed. When the rowboat came a few feet from dock, one of the burly men rowing the boat jumped across to the pier with a rope in hand. The entire pier shuddered, and I clutched the railing for dear life, and the man secured their boat to an iron knob. With a growl of effort, he tugged the rowboat up close to the pier and tied it taut, ensuring the crew could safely cross. None of the dozen men who clambered off the rowboat really heeded us. A smaller one with a rat-like face looked at us, but his expression said nothing. Maybe we were just in the way. A couple of them pushed past, but most of them waited for their captain to disembark. Lastly, the captain himself encroached upon the pier with an elongated step, pushing aside a rapier at his belt to move his legs widely. I saw a bit of loosely trimmed beard and wavy brown hair beneath his hat, but his face kept to the shadows. He'd loosened a flask at his belt and uncorked it, taking a mighty swig of what contents I could only assume. Blimey, it has been a dog's age since we had the luxury of steady land beneath our boots, he murmured, casting a quick, shadowed glance past us, seemingly too preoccupied to notice our presence. He stumbled a bit, either out of an alcoholic buzz or the anticipation for the land to lurch like the deck of his ship. And none too soon. The sea's embrace grows colder by the day. Lads, let's find our legs, afore she calls us back. I still didn't get a good look at him as he and his crew pushed past us. The symphony of boots across the pier rattled its foundation, and it was all Sierra and I could do to hold on while they surged onto land. When they reached the beach, they fell to their knees upon it. Sierra covered a smirk with her hand, watching as a dozen men knelt and kissed the sand. I watched fascinated as even the captain's black hat fell onto the sand, momentarily lifted in a gust before one of the crew snatched it up and offered it back to their boss. The captain's tousled, dark brown hair looked matted to his scalp, but somehow familiarly. Hesitant to disrupt their ritual, Sierra and I approached, both keeping a hand near our weapons. The captain lifted his head, swallowed another deep swig from his flask while adjusting his hat, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I caught a brief glimpse of sapphire blue eyes that glinted in the sun as he finally took note of us. Sierra stepped toward him, trying to look casual. "Hey, was wondering if you guys knew how to get to some kind of town, or knew anything to help us really. Me and this kid are traveling in search of getting stronger." The captain raised his head at her, still hidden beneath his hat. Some of his crew gathered around, not threatening exactly, but they looked wary. Then he grinned and stood up, grabbed his hat by the top and removed it. Before I could see his face, he was bowing before us, holding the hat out in his elongated hand. Aye, then you've timed this quite well. Me and me crew, we seek the aid of sturdy folk like you. Like us, I echoed. The man lifted his head, and I looked into the face of my good friend Will. His blue eyes twinkled in a friendly way, but there was a ruggedness to his grin that looked alien on him. His hair looked longer, scragglier, and he was more unshaven and weathered than I'd ever seen him. But it had to be Will. The name's Captain William, master of yonder vessel, he said, waving his hand callously toward the ocean. Now that I looked at him, his eyes definitely looked a little foggy from booze. What brings you to these parts? Sierra's shoulders drooped, the physical embodiment of dropping her guard. The fuck? Well, what are you doing here playing pirates? Don't you have a rebellion to run? His grin lapsed. What are you spouting on about? Oh, come on, Sierra growled. But then, right after she finished talking, her eyes widened a little and she muttered, "Oh, fuck." What? I asked. Am I missing something here? Because we just parted ways. Sierra jabbed me in the ribs, hard enough to knock the wind out of me rather than just simply advising me to keep my trap shut. My bad, I guess, Sierra gave in, not looking him in the eye. You look a lot like somebody we know. A passing resemblance, really. I'm already over it. The captain hesitated, not letting Sierra out of his sight. Right then, lass. Strange waters these, where a man might find his likeness in the face of another. Surely must have been a handsome bloke, albeit. He replaced his hat upon his head, somewhat darkening his features. But if it's passage you seek, or knowledge of these shores, then let's parley. Sierra crossed her arms. Alright, whatever. What is it? William smiled. I still couldn't see anyone else but my best friend Will, and struggled to play along with whatever Sierra was playing at. We're in need of sturdy arms and keen wits to navigate past the treachery of what these sea dogs call the Carnivorous Cove. Sierra snorted. Seriously, Carnivorous Cove? Please tell me that has to do with a carnival, I murmured. And this Carnivorous Cove is a challenge to you and your crew? Sierra went on, ignoring me but for the faintest grin. The captain's expression turned serious. Aye, a dire challenge it be. If it threatens the welfare of me crew, I'd trade the sun and moon to safeguard their passage. The capital holds what we seek for repairs and resupply. You appear capable, more or less. Aid us in our crossing and you'll have me gratitude, and a share of whatever fortunes we encounter. Sierra and I exchanged glances. It was the promise of a fight we needed, and it got us to the capital. And ye? You're wanderers of worlds, ain't ya? William added. Our vessel has braved the uncharted, faced down the tempest's roar, and danced with the abyss itself. You'd be boon to lay eyes on the bounty that my ship could offer you. Sierra and I locked eyes again, and her smirk grew. Now William showed us the promise of a fight and reward for it. Those were Sierra's two favorite things. Okay, sounds like you got a deal, Sierra agreed. She hoisted her sword up on her shoulder, perhaps as an intimidation factor if the deal went sour. To her, I realized the blade Sinistra must be almost as light as Ragnarok was to me. I'd never tried lifting her weapon, though, and I thought she might cleave me in half if I so much as touched it. She stuck out a hand to Will. The name's Sierra Jessura of Orden. William looked unaffected by any of that, and he took her hand firmly. Aye, well met, Sierra of Orden. He turned to me expectantly. And what of ye, young defender? I jumped, a little surprised at being addressed. Ryoku Dragontailin. He smirked at me and we shook hands. A pleasure. Best we set off without delay then. The cove waits for no man nor beast. Sierra and I nodded as one. Yeah, for sure, she agreed. Tapped her bag on her back. We got our shit. You got yours? William nodded to his men. All of them but him carried rucksacks. All he had was a light day pack on his back. Suited for a few days. By your leave. We started off down the beach. We made strange company, Sierra and I, odd enough together, now accompanied by a dozen pirates, one of which looked awfully like the friend we'd just left. By now I had to accept that it was, in fact, our dear friend Will. As soon as we were out of earshot, I nudged Sierra. You want to explain? She gave me a look, then smirked. Right, I guess you're confused as fuck, hey? When I didn't respond, she glanced away. Ever heard of doppelgangers in your world? I made a noise under my breath. You're not gonna write this off as coincidence, are you? We just happened to find somebody that looked like our best friend? Not quite, she replied. She quickly glanced over her shoulder to ensure the captain wasn't hovering behind her. The spirit world's a little different. A new rule with all these myriad realms is that souls are sort of recycled. Think of it like some sort of alternate timeline. There's supposed to be a bunch of Wills and me's, and even Vincents that look like they've led different lives. This one, for example, is like if Will grew up on the water. There's no honor to his voice like the one we knew. I stared at her incredulously. Well, how do I know I have the right Will from before? Or you? They wouldn't know about you, she told me firmly. Reincarnation isn't a thing for these doppelgangers. They're lookalikes of a morbid sort, but this William would never have stepped in to save you back in Bytold. Well, not for anything, anyway. Everything our Will did for you was of his own accord. I watched the alternate William, walking at the head of his pirate group, head held high, his boots kicking up sprays of sand. In some weird way, I could picture my Will ending up in this life. What if they were to meet up? Sierra shrugged. So far, what I've heard, it's never actually happened. One of them always leaves the world just in time, so two doppelgangers never walk the same land. It'd probably mess everything up with these fragile-ass worlds. I nodded, though I felt far from understanding. Let's call him William, I said softly, to prevent confusion. After all, that's what he said, isn't it? Yup, Sierra agreed. Just think of him as somebody else. If this turncoat turns tail, I'd run through without a thought of our Will somewhere else. Wouldn't affect him or me in the slightest. I nodded again, trying to steel myself to that same idea. Got it.